As I was sharing with our leaders, this was another week that many persons on last night that were down here, we kind of had our head tilted going, as it related to the decision of the text in which our author chose to write upon, given the subject matter. But we'll continue on in our conversations, and I'm certain that in your group and as well as on your partner conversations that you all had through the week, I'm hoping that you all had some rich conversations as it relates to singleness, being single, amen? But as I continue to kind of struggle with the lesson, to be honest about it, with what is it, what should I say, how should I reflect on the lesson? Here are a few things that came to thought. So, as I read somewhere, as I was doing some reflection and reading on Delilah, some commentators say that Delilah could be considered the Old Testament Judas. And commentators have described her as being a temptress, for being a deceitful manipulator, a betrayer, a political plant. And I was thinking, okay, Delilah, Monica. So you feel what I'm saying, right? But I said, okay, let's kind of take a look at Delilah, keeping the text in context and all of those types of things. So I said, let's take a look at Delilah. I said, now clearly Delilah was a single woman. So I thought maybe that's why she brought, Delilah was a single woman. Why do we think Delilah was a single woman at the time? Because when the rulers, the Philistine rulers came, they didn't go talk to her father, her brother, or whomever. She didn't have any male covering. They went directly to her, right? The other thing is that clearly she was an independent woman. She was handling her business. Now, there's a business that she was handling. Many say that she was a prostitute. She was a temple prostitute. But she didn't have a male covering, so she had to be able to eat, provide for herself, have lodging and things of that nature. So I said, well, she's an independent woman. She was providing for herself. She was handling her business. She was looking out for number one. And then clearly I said, she is clearly an attractive woman. Because she had this person, this man named Samson, who could have had anybody that he chose. And as we know, and as we read his history, we know he had two others. And he had the choosing of whomever. But for some reason, he saw her and he said, as Pastor would say, you know, that Beyonce, he just was like, whoa, who that? As she walked by. So clearly she was attractive. So she had some things going on for her. And I said she has the skill of persuasion. Skill of persuasion. So that's Delilah. That's how I was like, okay, well, maybe that's what she's looking at. Now, a lot of people, we were having conversations yesterday about this, you know. A lot of times people always associate Delilah with the negative. You know, what did we describe? She a Delilah. You can't trust her. She's manipulative, right? That's how we use Delilah, that name of a Delilah. We associate it with all the negative. And I thought to myself, I said, well, I believe when the Philistine rulers came up to Delilah and provided her a proposal, she enacted her WIIFM philosophy. WIIFM philosophy. I think it went into full gear. And this is what happens. Does anybody have any idea what the WIIFM is about? Shout it out. What's in it for me? You came to me. So let me see what's in it for me. I think it went into full gear. So she started taking a look at things. She said, okay, so you want me to hook up with this dude named Samson? All right, he's well known. He's feared. People know who this is. There might be some prominence that takes place in there. She said, he's strong. He has this strength that nobody else has, mystical strength. So in that mystical strength, I'm assuming that he is pleasing to the eye. So she said, y'all don't have to get tight. He was fine, right? He got to have some strength. He got to have some muscles, all right? Don't get all tight on me. So she had to make that consideration. What you asking me for? Let me see. Deacon Isaac, see? He had to be looking good. So he was physically attractive as well. He was easy on the eye, right? It's not only the brothers to be worried. Is she good on the eye, easy on the eye? When you guys be talking to your friends and they be trying to hook you up, what she look like? What she look like? Okay, so, you know, she was like, I know what he looked like, all right. I might be able to work this thing. He looked pretty good. The other thing is she knew that he was drawn to her. She didn't have to go to him. He looked, he said, look at that. Look at here, look at here. And so in that, so she think, well, you know, this job might not be too hard because he's into me. And so when the brothers have conversation, and so I was wondering, I said, now, Samson could have had all that he wanted, who all he wanted, all those types of things. But for whatever reason, he's drawn to her. The scripture says he loved her. Clearly he loved her. Brothers would say his nose was blown wide open when it came around to the light. Don't get tight, brothers, you know. Because she was asking questions that should have made him think, what's going on? Why you keep worrying me about this? She even was nagging him about it. Something should have went off. The light bulb should have went off. Okay, y'all leave me hang want to. But the light bulb should have gone off. His nose blown wide open, okay? So this is all these things that she's considering what's in it for her. But the biggest thing I think that she considered when it came around to what's in it for me, she said, once I make good on these deliverables they're asking me, I'm going to get paid. And paid very well. She ain't gonna have to struggle no more for a long, long time. She gonna get paid well. So therefore, she went on and did what she did, and the story is history. But I would contend, now ladies, as we're having our conversation, female perspective, male perspective thing, this is not what we should aspire to. This is not the type of manipulation techniques that we should ensue, all of those types of things. She's not our model. I can't tell you why our author chose her as a model as it related to singleness and things, but she's not our model. But she did consider some things, what's in it for me. And so that's what kind of stuck out to me. What is the WIIFM? So the WIIFM is not always bad. Okay, it's not always bad. You're like, why not is it? Because I think there are times when each and every one of us have had to consider and put into action our WIIFM. When? Maybe considering employment, a new job, a new position, okay? You're thinking about, is it the right time? Is it the right move for me? Does this particular position benefit me in my professional objectives and goals and things of that nature, right? So there are times when we do need to kind of consider, is there something in it for me for the positive? Another time might be simply in relationships. There are times each of us, when dealing with our own peers, we've had to make a decision, what's in it for me? Not for the negative, okay, we'll talk about that in a minute, but for the positive. Each of us as young people had to decide, is this the right peer group for me, right? We've had to decide, are these the people that I should be hanging around? Okay, are they going to lead me to good things, or are they going to lead us to bad things, or lead me to bad things? We have that conversation with our children. Choose your peers, choose your friends wisely. What's in it for you? Is it going to be the right connection for you? Is it going to be the right influence for you? My daughter and I this week were having a conversation. You know, she was lamenting a little bit, getting a little nervous about graduating and not having a job. And she's like, you know, all of my friends, all these people that I know, they're so much further ahead of me. I feel like I'm so far behind. And I said, well, I let her talk and things. I said, don't change the people in which you are hanging around simply because you feel that the people that God has placed in your life are a little bit further ahead of you. He's placed them in your life so you have people to aspire to, people to talk to. So we want to make sure that your what's in it for me is on the positive because it helps you to make better decisions as you move forward as a young woman. So the what's in it for me philosophy has its benefits, but it also has its drawbacks. And when we enact our what's in it for me philosophy for the wrong reasons, it will then lead to myopic and selfish thinking, that me syndrome. You don't think about anybody else, it's all about you. That is the negative aspect of it. And it has the potential of destroying relationships because it's in the what I want, when I want it, how I want it. It don't matter about anybody else. It's all about me, and it can destroy. When we're talking about relationships, there's more people involved in it. There's communication, but when we're myopic, when we're selfish, it does in fact destroy our relationships because we don't then take into account others. And so that can be destructive. And finally, it gives us a sense of false pride, false power, and false position. So you have to be really, really careful when you are enacting your WIIFM. Don't do like Delilah. She had a reason for why she did what she did. She had a reason. It may not have been the right reason. And she may have decided that she was going to live with the consequences of the reason. We don't know, because after she got paid, she was gone out the store. We don't know. But we do know how her actions and the actions of others affected Samson, right? And so we have to be careful when we enact our WIIFM to make sure that our actions are not negatively affecting others. That when we enact it, it is something for the positive to make sure that we're living according to God's will. So when you enact your WIIFM, make sure you do it prayerfully. Amen? Amen.
I have a handout here, so I need some people to help pass this out. I am intrigued when I heard Sister Braxton talk about WIIFM. Women were shaking their head, moving their head. I'm like, yeah, amen. If a man says WIIFM, he's just a dog. I just picked up that kind of double standard there. He's just a dirty dog. I'm a trained sociologist by background. That was my undergraduate degree. Sociology has a lot to do with theology. I'm always pushing to get people to not just proof text the words of the text, but keep the text in its historical context. How the social, political, and historical context even shaped how people understood God and how people talked about God in light of the demographical realities. Because beliefs about God are not shaped in a vacuum. I think I have enough. I ran off 100 copies. Okay. Barbara Essex did a terrible job with this lesson. It's a good book, but her lesson sucked. But the subject is important. All the married people in the room stand. Married. All right? Sit down. All the single people in the house stand. There's more standing now than there were a minute ago. All right? You may sit. It proves my point. One of the big mistakes churches do is assume we talk as if the majority of the adults are all married, and we ignore single adults, which means you're ignoring the majority of your adult population. And we don't preach and teach and witness to the congregation we think we have, but we have to minister to the congregation that we actually have, all right? And that's why one of the reasons why churches impose upon people, they're giving answers to questions people aren't asking, and what people do is they simply adjust to what they see as your expectation, and they drive their real behavior underground. And they learn how to front and mask. And so we have these great big social escapades, these exercises in hypocrisy called church. All right? And I'm just not into hypocrisies. You know, as a 52-year-old African-American male, at some time in life, you give yourself the freedom to actually be honest and be real. And that's what I like about Jesus. Jesus was honest and Jesus was real. Let's look at the assumptions about marriage in Roman and Greco culture and open it up for some questions. Number one, in the Jewish world, of which most of the Old Testament is written, that comes into collide with the New Testament world, the Roman Greco world in the New Testament, and lays the foundation for some of the things that Paul became preoccupied with, is number one, the Jewish world was polygamous. A man could marry as many wives as he could economically support. Love and romance and finance went hand in hand. You never got one without the other. There were no freebies. All right? And it's always been the case that men got to pay for it. And it's always been the case that women are selling it. Men got to pay for it, and women are selling it. Now, that may sound like derogatory language, but all y'all tell your daughters, don't sell yourself cheap. He got to have a good job, yada, yada, yada. And at the end of the day, every man knows that when he's in the game, looking for a good wife, he ain't walking up to her talking about how good he is at rocking the headboard. He's talking about the kind of life he can provide. He is attaching an economic expectation. And before women let you get at all this, they telling you, you got to bring something to the table. You got to pay for this. Let's not lie about it. Men are buying it, women are selling it. It ain't changed. And I'm telling my daughter, don't come cheap. And I'm telling my son, you got to be able to bid high. That is the reality of this world. And don't you pontificate on me, because I'm not the kind of Negro to try and lie to. All right? So now, in polygamous society, they were arranged marriages. The women had no say about who they married. Marriages for girls were arranged as early as 10 years of age. You would be betrothed, promised, when you hit your cycle. When typically at the age of puberty, if a woman was betrothed, if two families got together, two fathers said, your daughter's going to marry my son. When she becomes a woman, that was defined as when she had her cycle. She was given then in marriage, when she hit puberty. Men sometimes delayed marriage till they thought he was ready to take care of a family. He might be in his 20s, he might be in his 30s, and then given that 12 or 13-year-old girl in marriage. All right? Girls were given in marriage in exchange for a bid price, a certain amount of cattle, whatever. That depended on the wealth of the family. That depended upon if she looked like Beyonce, or if she looked like Aunt Esther, if she was Rachel or weak-eyed Leah. That affected the bid price. We do the same thing in informal ways at the club. Some people get more suitors asking for their number than others. Huh? Brothers, how many times you went to the club? Why was it the girl whose number you wanted happened to be sitting by the last girl in the world you would ever want to talk to? And when you tried to ask the one girl to dance, her ugly friend jumped up and said, yeah, I want to dance. Can I be real? You wouldn't give nothing in exchange for that one, but you'll sell your whole world for that one. All right. Girls were given in exchange for a bid price. The bid price had to do with the market value of that young lady. Market value. All right? And that had everything to do from the family's wealth to your appearance, everything. And the bride's family provided a dowry to the groom for her care and for her inheritance to the children. So marriage was an economic conversation. It had nothing to do with love. If you loved them, fine. If you didn't, it didn't matter. That's a late Western preoccupation with love, so marriages start hot and grow cold, and we have a high divorce rate. They say theirs started cold, grow hot. Whether those are oversimplifications, that's a matter of debate. But the bride's family had to bring a dowry. So in other words, this made sure you didn't marry beneath you, because families wanted to protect property. So if he is from a well-to-do family, he was not allowed to marry a girl from a poor family, because she couldn't bring a dowry. The dowry was saying that the family of the mother will invest in her care, so it was never expected that the husband alone had to care for her economically. The bride's family was also responsible for her economic well-being. They brought the dowry. And it was also assumed that this dowry would provide for her care now, and upon death, it would be transferred to the kids to pass on a positive legacy. So you had to marry. These arranged marriages were on the basis of economic parity. They were protecting property. You are not going to let our money go to waste on them folks who are going to try and marry their way, sleep their way into wealth. Ain't going to happen. All right? The Laverite law provided protection for the death of a husband. The husband died. His next oldest brother married her if she was at the childbearing ages to keep his name alive, and that was their form of Social Security from an economic standpoint. Again, it had nothing to do with love. What if she couldn't stand him? Nobody ever cared about the woman's feelings about who she loved. This was about who's going to feed her and clothe her and take care of her in this world. Marriage had nothing to do with love. We who have Cinderella orientations around love really have trouble when you look at the biblical treatment of love. That's why you got to be careful when you start snatching scriptures and doing marriage counseling, marriage and relational counseling. Husbands could divorce a wife for any reason. You see in Leviticus 21:7, Matthew 19:3, they asked Jesus, can we divorce our wives for any reason? Any reason. I just don't like your hair no more. I'm sick of you. Any reason. You didn't have to have a reason. You were an at-will employee. I could fire you at any reason without notice and without cause. Don't want you. Want a new model. Want to trade you in. Gone. And then the woman had to return in shame to her father's house if he was alive. If he was dead, then her brother's house. If they didn't have any fathers or brothers, the prostitute population was driven by discarded women. Nearly all Jewish women in this society, in this arrangement, were of a reproductive age, were married because men could have multiple wives. Since men die in war, while we birth 1.2 males for every one female, seems like God is balancing because of violence among men, because men don't take care of themselves as well in terms of their health as women, and war, men tend to die younger, different things happen. So within the marriage reproductive ages, there has always been a numerical imbalance between men and women, and historically the strategy for covering that was polygamy. So almost all women of reproductive age, even weak-eyed Leah, got married. They do them as a package deal. If you want the pretty one, you got to take the other one too. I won't charge you as much for her, but take her off my hands. And since they could have multiple wives, fine. I'll let her cut the grass or something. I mean, that was the attitude. We've come a long way in terms of women's rights and women's regard. And so therefore, nearly all women of reproductive age were married except widows. The objective here was controlling the sexuality of women. The objective. Controlling the sexuality of women. Why? Two reasons. Property. Paternity. Which then pointed back to property. My wife has a child, I am responsible to take care of that child, and that child has access to my estate. And the only way I can guarantee that what comes out of her is mine is if I can make sure I can control what goes into her is only me. There was no controlling where a man spread his seed. There was controlling where a woman spread her legs. I'm just be candid, the world that they lived in. Because from a man's perspective, and there's no Old Testament books written from a woman's perspective, even if it's written by a woman. It's written from a man's perspective. I'm trying to protect my property and my name, my paternity. I don't want one caught in the net that you saying he got the last name Braxton, but for some reason his head ain't shaped like mine. Mama's baby, daddy's maybe. And you passing that one off as if it's mine. And the older he get, he look more and more like my cousin John than he do me. Huh? I'm looking at Pastor Gillen, did such a great job last week. Give her another hand. But you know, being in the military, a lot of people put on assignment and come home a year later, and the wife is pregnant, and they start counting, and she swear it was when he came home for that weekend. And he just looking at that child all them years wondering, but see, now they can do a testis. They can do a testis. It's about controlling the women's sexuality. All right? Now, in the New Testament, different culture. Jewish culture in the New Testament runs into and bumps up with Roman Greco culture, where marriage as a legal institution was monogamy. One legal wife at a time, what we call serial monogamy, because true monogamy, if you look at other mammals, means one sexual partner for your entire life. 99% of people in our culture can't make that claim. They say I'm monogamous, not technically. Very few people have been monogamous. That meant one person your whole life. Serial monogamy means I only do one at a time. That's most people's testimony. Most people say, well, this is my story. So one legal wife at a time. Marriages were still arranged. Marriage was encouraged but not required, as it was in Jewish society. Women could initiate divorce in Roman culture. They couldn't in Greek culture. In Greek culture, a woman couldn't even start a conversation with her husband in the home unless he gave her permission. They literally was, you shut up until I talk to you, till I tell you to talk. That was Greco culture. Now, whereas in Jewish culture, a man could have as many wives as he could economically support, in Greco culture, a man had one legal wife, but it was assumed, particularly men of means, remember romance and finance? Men of means, it was expected and commonly practiced that they engaged with the hatari. They were high-priced prostitutes, well-educated, groomed to entertain men and address all of their delights, from intellectual down to physical. And so it was still kind of an informal type of polygamy because it was assumed that a man will have more than one sexual dalliance, not just his wife. Her job was to bear him children to keep his home. And he would export most of his fantasy and desire. That was Greek culture. Roman culture, a woman had more legal rights, she could own property, and she could initiate divorce. Added up, there were significant numbers of women in Roman Greco culture who were not married. As a result, you had more sexually liberated women. And so this was driven by the Second War Exchange. It was driven by the perpetual it's going to make sense in a moment. The perpetual, what we call single, they just said unmarried. Perpetual single status you had different behavior because you had different demographic. In Jewish society, if all the women of reproductive age got a husband, there's no such thing as a single woman. It just, that whole concept was foreign to them. There's no such thing as no single woman. Your husband died to give you a brother, but you covered. The only single woman there really were widowed women past the reproductive age, then their sons or whomever would take care of them. But there were no single women in the reproductive age. It was next to nil. And so the sexual behavior of women was well controlled. There was never concern for controlling the male sexual behavior of men. Then, in Greco society, because they did not have legally polygamy, a man had one wife. Then if every man can only have one wife, and you got more women than men in the reproductive years, then that means that you're going to have a growing number of women in the reproductive ages who don't have a husband, that they are single. So then what do they do? If you're a widow, you're older, you're past the reproductive ages, you can deal with that a little more gracefully. But when you're young people have young hormones. Biology pushes behavior. White knuckling at 70 is very different from white knuckling at 25. Say amen under your breath. I remember Bill Cosby telling the story of how once when he was young, he used to go on the road. He was away from Camille, and he said he'd come home. He'd been on the road for a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, and Camille was already in the bed. And he would get undressed, get into bed, roll over, rub her provocatively on her hip, and she'd sometimes push his hand away, and he'd get up and pace the floor all night long. Then he said one day it happened. He said he came home. He'd been on the road for a week, 10 days. He came home. Camille was already in bed asleep. He got undressed, got into bed. He rolled over. He rubbed her provocatively on her hip. She pushed his hand away. He rolled over and said, "Thank you, God." He didn't want to either. Still a man, but whether it's sports or in the bedroom, we slow down as we get older. Say amen under your breath, man. You know, I know you don't want to compromise your alpha male status. But stuff you couldn't wait about years ago, you can wait now. I can wait till after the game. And so because of that, more sexually liberated behavior, this becomes the premise, the impetus for Paul freaking out when he sees these uncontrolled women. Basically what Paul saw is a whole bunch of what I like to call the Olivia Pope problem. The Olivia Pope problem. That's what Delilah is, Olivia Pope problem. She is a smart woman who is in control of her own sexuality, right, wrong, or indifferent. She is not only smart, but she's learned how to use the power of her sexuality. Now, the problem with the Olivia Popes, which you're seeing on Scandal, and you see in Delilah, and some of you have seen in your own life, you can play that game with men and get their attention. We're visual, we're suckers for seduction. Man's a man. I'm not endorsing bad behavior when I say that. What I'm saying is that there's a reason why y'all wear clothes sometimes a half a size too small. And you guys have slits up the side of your clothes and we don't, because we know that's not the way we draw you. But you know, you like to give a little visual tease. You understand we are suckers for what we see. And so when you play that game, you can, when you intentionally use your sexual power that way, it's a dangerous road because a man can fall into that trap, and he will, if you've manipulated him sexually, he will love you, but then that same man will turn around and hurt you. Because at the end of the day, he ain't gonna sacrifice his life for you, his job for you, his professional name for you. You can get him in bed, but you probably ain't gonna get him down the aisle. Because they say you never marry your mistress, you'll never trust her, because men are always still concerned about controlling a woman's sexuality. And so you play that game, and then you become the woman who works her will, but at the end of the day, Fritz will kill Olivia before he'll let Olivia bring him down. So while we enjoy the ride, she's playing the most oldest and most dangerous game in the world. And so one of the challenges we have in a world where you have large numbers of women in the reproductive age with no man, and in our society, when you look at those who are knocked out of the marriage pool because of drugs, because of economic unreadiness, because of incarceration, because of perpetually fighting wars, the numbers are so imbalanced. I think at Morehouse this year and Spelman that there is for the first time in history, Spelman had a larger freshman class than Morehouse. And between Spelman and Clark on the Morehouse campus right there together, there's a 4-to-1, 5-to-1 ratio. And 2/3 of all college-educated graduates now are females, which means that they're going to be the economically stronger sex going forward. And if the mentality is you got to bring something to the table, that means a lot of women who are looking for their economic equal are going to be by themselves if they don't want to marry down. And this is happening in white society, black society, across the board. So then it becomes a challenge, how do I live within myself in a society that simply does not provide access to a male for most women throughout their lives? And if you think you're going to solve that conversation by quoting Old Testament passages, the only thing you're going to do is force people to hide what they're doing and be burdened with guilt over what they're doing and to deal with that internal chaos that comes from a dichotomized life. And it's well nigh time that the church has a very honest and at some point difficult conversation about human sexuality and sexual behavior in the world in which we live now. So I'm not necessarily answering all the questions, but they told me in seminary, you may not have an answer to all the questions, but make sure that you're raising the right questions. Questions, comments, feedback. Whoa! I don't think any subject has brought forth a response like that. I think the topic is too provocative not to have any, even though we'll go over for a few minutes. Right here and then right here. They're going to literally fight over. Okay, yeah. See what happens when you get liberated women?
You know, you spoke a lot about women, but how about men? Men are the same way. I mean, they're the same way. How do you think?
Exactly, but my point was to bring out the reality of what drives biblical passages treating marriage and human sexuality. It's always, it's from a male perspective to control the sexual practice and mores of women and to bring that out. Because we already know men misbehave. I mean, that's...
Okay, well...
Do I have to establish that?
Yeah, say it. Just say it.
No one is surprised about Fritz's behavior. It's Olivia that startles you. Go, whoa, but go, girl. Go ahead.
Okay, so Pastor, you were talking earlier, and you gave the example by having people stand up and show that there was a majority of single people in here. So my question has to do with really the fourth commandment. Yeah, I'm going back. Seventh commandment, actually, thou shalt not commit adultery. Right? So you have a bunch of single people up in the church, really. And so, you know, what about the sexual need of, you know, single folks? Especially in the face of that seventh commandment. I mean, the real question I wanted to ask before I got married a long time ago was, is it okay for single people, not married people, to commit adultery, but single people to engage? I mean, because the commandments don't talk about fornication. They speak specifically about...
And again, the reason why you don't have fornication talked about in the Old Testament is because all the women were covered. And adultery was not a male sin. What caused David to be an adulterer with Bathsheba was that she was Uriah's wife. If she had been single, it would have just been another concubine. So they say Bathsheba, Uriah's wife. That's what made it a sin. All right? So they don't talk about fornication. Fornication is a New Testament term. It comes from the Greek word porneia, which is the root word for pornography. And it's a broad term that means sexual misconduct, sexual misbehavior. It means a whole lot of things. So you have to have context when you use the term fornication. Sometimes the word fornication is used in reference to adultery. Sometimes fornication is used, Paul uses a lot in reference to people participating in the fertility cults. A lot of it was driven by a lot of these large numbers of single women who then became fodder for this sexual, off-the-chain, animal house type behavior that was going on, driven by demographics. And Paul was saying, stay away from their version of the strip clubs, these fertility cults and so forth. All right? And from a Jewish standpoint, Paul being a Pharisee, that for folks to be having sex outside of marriage was definitely a no-no for men. For women, of course you didn't do that because a woman had to produce sheets on the wedding night, believing that the hymen was broken, there was blood, and if she didn't bleed, she could be stoned to death at her father's door, and the dowry not returned. So it was assumed she's going to be a virgin. And, you know, for the men, it was kind of loose. All right? So when you get into the New Testament, and Paul comes in there with that Pharisaic standard, and then he sees a society where men are married, but it's a given they're going to have liaisons outside the marriage, and then women may or may not be married, and all this other stuff is going on, then Paul just kind of snaps on it. And he says, over and over, he talks about avoiding fornication. So he's talking about all that sexual uncleanness, from sex outside of marriage, to the adultery, to the fertility cults, to all of that. So you see, even the definitions change. Our definition of adultery is much different from what it was in David's time. We would use it more egalitarian. Anyone who has sex outside their marriage, we'd call it adultery. They would only say if a man could be single and have sex with a married woman, it was adultery because you have slept with another man's wife. Because if you sleep with another man's wife, now you're threatening paternity and property. Right? Those were the underwriting concerns. In our society, let me tell you what I know is not going to happen. Are millions of people who never afforded the opportunity to marry because of demographics going to go their whole life and be celibate? Hasn't worked out very well for the priesthood. So we can preach abstinent only like Sarah Palin and then have a baby out of wedlock, and then teach it to your children and they have a baby out of wedlock. And you know, we can do all that kind of stuff, push behavior underground, teach people hypocrisy, and still end up with the same old problems. Or we can wrestle with what's a different kind of conversation around human sexuality, healthy sexual mores in the times in which we live. Now, some preachers would say to me, that's demonic to even raise the question like that, but most of them who would say that have had enough of their own liaisons, they got nerve to even say it. I was talking to a preacher the other day, he was talking about homosexuality and yada, yada, yada. I said, well, what's the difference between that and your girlfriend's? Then he used some bad language with me, and I told him we could step outside. We did all that other craziness. I knew him real well, so, you know, What I'm saying is that the church needs a lot of conversation. I'm not going to solve it today. But the constant thing I hear is for grown people who are at a stage in life where, yeah, they itch. And people saying, just don't scratch it. And what I'm saying, in prison, it will take heterosexual men, and they'll turn on another man and rationalize it in their man and say, well, you're the one that's gay, not me, because you're the one taking it. We call that prison sex, and they'll get out of prison and never even think about touching another man again and deny they did it while they were in there, but they couldn't control that hormonal backlog. Human sexuality is powerful. And so what I'm saying is having this conversation built upon pretense and denial, I don't think it's helped anybody out. So I think the body of Christ is struggling with having an honest conversation today based upon honest medical science and all those kinds of things, and not basing it on 3,000-year-old sociology, assumptions, worldviews, and then pretending. That's about all I can do with it right now. But we see that reality every day. You know, and a lot of times people talk about conferences, we want to get together. How do you live? How do you live single and righteous? I know what's underneath that question. Who's going to scratch my itch? It's not a man's question, because men know whenever they get ready to get ready, you could be broke, blind with one leg. And because of the numbers, a man can find a woman. And I have a beautiful 20-year-old daughter getting ready to turn 21, college-educated, smart personality. She's already worried about whether or not she'll be able to find a man. And I'm trying to teach my son not to fall into eeny, meeny, miny, mo. And so, you know, it's a question, it's a hard question. And for me, it's more a matter of over here with the men saying, partner, slow your roll. That's our challenge. For the women, that's the question for Sister Braxton to sit down with y'all and say, what do you do when you got an itch and there ain't nobody, no old-fashioned way to scratch it righteously that you can say during testimonial service? So y'all need to wrestle with that at next year's women's conference. And me and the brothers will be over here talking about strategies for slowing our roll. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Let's stand for prayer.